without limits or judgment. A place for you and people like you to tell your most effed up stories. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we have a guest. We haven't had a guest in a while, and we have an exciting guest. We have with us tonight Chris O'Brien. He's going to be discussing a lot of the material from his new book, Stalking The Herd. For anybody who's followed cattle mutilation in particular, if you've been following UFO phenomenon, they're kind of linked.
Synonymous.
Yeah. So this is like the ultimate book on cattle mutilation. I mean, it goes from the beginning, like before Christ, up till now. Everything that you could ever want to know on the subject is present in the book, and of course, we're going to be covering that in this podcast. And on another note, if any of you has any paranormal stories, pictures, or video, or anything of that nature, submit that to us. We will put it on the website and possibly get it in a podcast. You can go to our website at effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. Go to submissions and just fill out the form. It's really, really easy to do. And I guess for anyone else who's been wondering, we have our software problem fixed so we can interview people again. So for anybody that got any really crazy stories, we are taking guests again. And with that said, without further ado, hello, Chris, and welcome back to the show.
Yeah, I kind of went back and revisited the YouTube version of it. Of course, we did talk about the Skinwalker Ranch. I think it was back in October 2012. So it's been, a year and a half.
Yeah, I mean,
time flies, man.
Oh, isn't that the truth?
But I noticed there was like over 17,000 hits on that particular episode. Congratulations, you guys are spreading the word out there, and I see you're getting some good guests. And
thank you very much.
I was happy at the time. Say again.
I said thank you very much for playing a big part in that. That was one of my favorite episodes that we've done, and I feel that your contribution really helped boost us up a lot there, right when we were getting started. So a very big thank you from us here.
Yeah, you're welcome. Gogs Mackay is one of my moderators over at forum.theparacast.com. Of course, my show, The Paracast, I think just had its 8th year anniversary. I've been going on 5, I think. So, yeah, I think you guys have the title alone made me want to go check you guys out because, we need a little bit more irreverence, kind of a more of an open sort of take no prisoners approach in this field. It's become so calcified and so entrenched in personalities and people getting bogged down for decades on particular cases. I'm willing to help folks out who are up and coming in this field that really have an out of the box way of looking at things. And Gogs, said, hey, check these guys out and help them out. And so it was my pleasure, and it's good to be back.
Well, I appreciate that as well. And actually, yeah, Gogs was great. I mean, he introduced us to Jason Haxton, and then he introduced us to you, and then it just seemed to have a flood effect with people afterwards. And of course, the subject matter that we dove into last time, the Skinwalker Ranch phenomenon, some of what happened there actually leads us right to what your new book. I mean, when we talk about mutilation, I mean, your new book, Stalking the Herd. And for anybody who's into this stuff, who's wanted to know more about cattle mutilation, I can say personally, at least for me, that this is the most thorough and detailed. I mean, I was actually blown away with the detail. I mean, starting right from the beginning with the religious aspects of cattle way, way back, I mean, before Christ, and then all the way to modern times and the significance that it played. I mean, again, like, it blew me away. In fact, I have to reread it because I found that for every paragraph, there are so many points that you have to keep in mind for all the tie-ins later on. So it's something that must have taken you a long time to put together.
Well, actually, it's funny you should mention that. It was about a month after after I signed my contract for the book that I did your show last.
Oh, really?
So ever since then, I've been working on it.
Oh, I could
That's
understand.
fantastic. I have to say it's probably one of the most sobering exposés on the whole phenomenon. Of course, every time you pick up a book like this, you expect the conclusion to be, and the extraterrestrials lived happily ever after with parts of our cows.
I don't know if I've ever read a book like that.
Well, the conclusion.
All you have
being,
to do is look at any of the major books on the subject published in the last 30 years, and there's really only one. I mean, this is the first book that brings together up to like a dozen different databases that have been stovepipe, living independently for decades on their own, several of which the vast majority of people out there have never even heard of the investigator or the database for that matter, or that it even existed. And I've spent 20 years on this subject, and over those years, I've networked with a couple of handfuls of people really that have been involved in attempting to scientifically and in a criminal, actually, a law enforcement way, also cops and other investigators. These people have been coming up with a lot of data since the late 60s, early 70s. And I thought it was finally the right time to put all this data, between two book covers, basically, and do it as objectively, as non-judgmentally, as skeptically, and not put any sort of emphasis on, my pet theory or somebody else's pet theory. Just throw the mud against the wall and see what sticks. And I'm really proud of this book. If I never write another book again, I'll be okay with it.
Well, I have to say I really agree with some of your terminology there, talking about the data, because I was about halfway through the book last night, and I on my second read, trying to get ready to do this, because wow, what a pile of information. And I sat back, I kind of put my head in my hands. And of course, as I've been reading this, my wife is milling about, and the things that really catch my attention, I tell her, I read the paragraphs to her. I finally sat back, I put my head in my hands, and I said, we will need access to a NSA level artificial intelligence to feed all of this data into, to try to get some handle, because that's
a great idea. Let's call DARPA.
Yeah, I'm sure they have one of their artificial agents just ready to go, because there's so many data points, and I really liked what you said about how the the silence in between
Yeah.
the phenomenon. It's as important as the silence in between notes, and that really in music, of course, and that really struck a chord in me, to use another musical metaphor. And I really got me thinking, and I tried, as I was reading, I kept trying to pull my perspective back, try to pull it away from such an because it's such an up close and personal and gritty blood and meat phenomenon, to try to pull yourself out of that knee jerk emotional connection that you have with it, and
Yeah,
try to
and
look at
that's
it.
tough, man. That's tough. Well, there's a lot of people that have bit the dust and fallen off, to the wayside over the years. There haven't been many people willing to even, really dive in, investigating, researching this subject. And boy, I'll tell you, the rate of attrition is pretty sobering. And if it's not attrition, it's becoming entrenched and pigeonholed and blinded and cherry picking data for your own particular conclusion. And there has really been no objectivity in this field for at least 30 years.
The information tends to devolve and mutate over time, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. Well, it's not so much the information devolves. The information is static. I mean, it is data. It's the interpretation of the data that
Yeah.
tends to, I think, in very good point. Uh, the harder it is to figure something out, and the more mysterious it is, the more you have to go further back to more basic, primal kind of archetypal symbols to even get a sense of the players, of the agendas, of the possible motivations. And it does. You have to devolve your thinking back to the very base root of whatever it is that you're looking into in terms of the paranormal and the mysterious. You just can't rely on everybody else's opinions and a lot of spin and hyperbole and careers, generating cash and excitement every 6-8 months so that you can continue your visibility. And I don't want to point any fingers, but in this particular realm, it's been dominated by by one person. So
We both know exactly.
who shall remain nameless. No,
Yeah,
no.
okay.
Linda Howe has had this has been her private little punch bowl for a lot of years, and Linda trained me to interview people. I owe her a tremendous debt of gratitude. She's one of the unsung heroes of this field. The mysterious half cat mystery, which is still, I have no idea even how to approach that. She's the only one that's really diligently, year after year, decade after decade, been logging the data. So Linda is an extremely important, integral part of this whole process. But that's in terms of gathering the data, interviewing the witnesses. It's what happens after that. What is your conclusion? What does that tell you as an investigator, as a researcher? What
She's very
are
set on her
your
opinion.
particular? Yeah, where are you gonna kind of pitch your tent? And stalking the herd is done in such a way that there are no tents to pitch. There's just the data. My next book, which I'm already hard at work on, will be an analysis of Stalking the Herd, and that will be me pitching my tent with my co-author David Perkins.
Well, speaking on the book itself, I mean, obviously it like the main focal point is bovine. It's
Yeah.
cattle. But I mean, as is mentioned in the book, I mean, there's lots of other farm animals like chicken, sheep, and other animals, even the horse.
Oh, there's seals, dolphins. I mean, you could go down the list. Bison, elk. I had a case where there was a mutilated cow, and somehow a coyote came sniffing around, and it ended up becoming mutilated. That's extremely rare.
Wow. Yeah, that is.
So, I had somebody report a mutilated squirrel once, which I thought was actually kind of funny. But hey, at least they're looking,
Yeah. Well,
So
and again, all these tens of thousands of household, domestic cats that have been discovered in suburban areas in all the major cities of the West. It started the real first notoriety of these cases began in 70, 71 in Brentwood. I mean, some of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the LA area. So, I mean, this is a really complicated subject. When I set out to write it, I wanted to have some analysis in there, but, I had to take 200 pages out, and the book is 600 pages.
Yeah,
So,
yes.
it would have been 2.5 pounds to try to ship this thing, and it would have cost more. Well, it does cost more to ship it overseas than it does, the cost of the book. So you got to draw the line somewhere.
So
Certainly, I now in that vein, you of course we mentioned the kind of chronological historical order that you like the approach that you took when you were laying everything out. Now, I mean, of course, the reader will draw their own conclusions when they get to the end, and of course, I think. You left it in kind of in terms of almost looking at it as a tiered mystery, and I thought it'd be interesting if we start with where the book started, and what religious and spiritual connections. There's a lot of sacrificial blood sacrifice undertones and everything. And, how do you
which
feel
is
that,
mostly ignored by other researchers.
well,
yeah.
what was interesting, and like in the Bible, certain religious sects wouldn't eat meat unless the blood was drained from the animal.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
And there were very, very stringent rituals and methodology and certain dictated ways that livestock was slaughtered 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. I mean, but in terms of bovines, I think, first of all, cattle mutilation, for anybody who's listening to this show that doesn't know what the hell we're talking about, is a head of livestock that's discovered. And it could be as, all these other animals that we've talked about, but cattle are about 90%, I would say, of cases. And if they're discovered dead for no apparent reason, and there's no clues around to show the investigator or the rancher how the animal died, because it's missing soft tissue organs, like the genitalia are gone. Oftentimes the tongue is taken deep from within the esophagus. The mandible flesh on the most of the time on the skyward, the top mandible jawbone, the flesh has been what appears to be surgically taken away. Oftentimes the reproductive tract is taken out of the rear end of the cow, the mammary glands, an eye, an ears, sometimes a small patch or a big patch of flesh that seems to be cut out with a sharp implement. There is no real concrete pattern. We do have the classic mutilation, which has most of those things that we just talked about. The most important being the mandible flesh gone, the tongue gone from the esophagus. Now, first of all, before we go on, these animals are sometimes reported. The weirder the case, the less likely it is for that animal to be reported. It will be reported if there's weird lights around or helicopters or people seen in the pasture. But most of the time, there's no clues whatsoever to the rancher, who's very vigilant, and his dogs. Generally, this is done like a magician. Nobody heard anything. The dogs didn't bark. They woke up in the morning, and there was the animal. So for the first-time listeners, or people who aren't aware of what we're going to be talking about for 2 hours, that's basically what we're discussing. But to get back to your point about cattle and sacredness, back 10,500 years ago, some tribe, some proto-cowboy group, if you will, somehow was able to contain a herd of 80 animals. And these were called aurochs, and they were wild animals. They could go almost 3,000 pounds, 10 feet at the shoulder. They look like small elephants, according to Julius Caesar. And somehow, about 10,500 BC, a group of northern Iranian herders were able to contain these animals. And as a result, all 940-something breeds of cattle today that represent 1.37 billion cattle, which weigh more than humans do on the planet. If you added up all the cattle on one side of the scale and put humans, cattle would be about even or maybe a little more In terms of sheer weight, they occupy 25% of the landmass. They're the largest source of the creation of deserts because of there are so many of them. They're the biggest reason why we're cutting down the rainforests. They're the largest source of freshwater pollution. They're the second or possibly the third, depending on your definition, of naturally producing ozone depleting gas. Cows burp and fart once every 2 minutes. 1.37 burping and farting cows creates millions of tons of methane. So this is cattle. This is what we're dealing with. A small group of cattle 10,500 years ago. I'm telling you, those guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't you think that those were going to be extremely valuable, extremely sacred, honored, animals, that somehow these wild animals were domesticated and they were starting to produce babies?
Well,
For 1,000 years, you had the emergence of a bull and cow cult, religious cult. I mean, Karahuyak, the famous archaeological site in I think Turkey or Anatolia, worship both, and this continued all the way down through several thousand years. And you have the bull worship, the solar aspect of that worship, kind of splitting off and going to the west, down into the Minoan civilization, Greece, Rome, the Mithra cults. You have the lunar aspect, like the cow, basically. And this is a Cliff Notes version, but the lunar aspect seems to go east. And so even today, they worship, sacred white Brahma cattle. And the cow kind of has a special importance in many ways. Of course, you have the continuation of both bull and cow worship down into the Egyptian cultures, all through the early to mid period. And of course, in North Africa and Eastern Africa, you have cattle today are still considered money. A man's worth is judged by a number of cattle. In the Dinka, the Nur, the Maasai cultures. So we have this spiritual relationship going on that's very ancient and very ceremonious.
Well, one of the interesting things that you mentioned in there was that, as the early humans came out and they were testing the different things that they could eat, berries, this and that, and they discovered, of course, the hallucinogenic mushrooms that would grow in the dung patties.
Right. Yeah. Cubensis, psilocybin cubensis prefers growing in ungulate dung. Any sort of animal that chews its cud and eats grass, basically. But cattle, growing up spending 3 years as a slave cowboy on a show horse ranch with 30 head of cattle in Washington State, I became very, very familiar with the growth preferences of the psilocybe cubensis mushroom. Actually, imported Mexicali strains into the Pacific Northwest. Don't tell anybody.
So that, the experimentation with that mushroom was actually very important to how cultures actually, their belief system, their rituals and stuff like that.
Yeah, it even goes deeper than that, Will. Terence McKenna and his brother Dennis, actually, with Terence's interpretation, came up with a wonderful theory that primates, early primates coming down for the first time into the savannas of North Africa as the Sahara started growing and these grasslands started developing instead of trees where they were living, swinging from branches to branches, they came down, became upright, looking for new food sources. And one of the first things they'd see was these wonderful mushrooms growing out of cow crap. So...
Yeah. The so-called stoned ape theory, I believe he called it.
Exactly, the stoned ape theory. And you have advanced visual acuity, higher sexual proclivity, heightened senses, and you have this potential to jumpstart human consciousness through the use of psychotropic magic mushrooms. It jump-started mine.
Well, actually, Ryan has a bit on that himself, because I know he studied the crap out of that stuff. But
The Food of the Gods was an amazing book.
So we have we've established reasons, at least to some extent of why early cultures, worship cows and bovine in general. So it's interesting, I guess, that when you think of modern times, and you think of when people think of even South Park does the UFOs abducting cows, right?
Yeah, you know where he got the idea? He saw one of my lectures at Adams State College.
Well, it's just
funny you should mention that.
Yeah, well, it's funny because it's actually true. I mean, they are probably the poster animal for the alien mutilation abduction phenomenon.
Yeah, and boy, I'll tell you, this book is not only looks at how that particular meme in the culture started, but it also looks at the memes that law enforcement and politicians were looking at, that it was a cult crime, ritual blood sacrifice. I mean, this was a big deal in the mid-'70s.
Well, see, the thing that like I kind of had a trouble getting my head around, like when you'd see the politicians say, oh, it was a Satanist cult, or it was a madman, but the thing was that scientists would say that the incision marks and stuff like that were singed as if done by laser. And I guess one of the...
No, that's not...
wasn't always true, I know.
That wasn't until later, and that that gets into a whole ball of wax way ahead of the horse. We got the cart way ahead of the horse here.
Well, let's go to one of the earlier cases that was really, I guess, mystifying. I don't know how you'd explain it. And, of course, I'm talking about Snippy the horse.
No, wait a minute. We got a whole history of cases way before Snippy. I've got a 5,000-year-old fresco from Algeria, a wonderful photograph, and then a detail of the photograph of the part I'm going to talk about. But you have this huge herd of cattle. I could only fit the last portion of the herd. In the original fresco, it extends back several feet, and at the front you have what appears to be a cattle mutilation going on. Now this is a cave painting from 5,000 years ago. Okay, there's a guy with his hand reaching in the back end of a cow that's on its back. It's missing one of its legs. And there's this ghostly, almost like an alien gray figure with this weird tool at its mandible.
Actually, I remember seeing that picture. It was like...
and we have our first documented case coming from the court records of James I of England in 1606 of hundreds of sheep mutilations occurring around London.
That's wild.
Yeah, right. At the same time, Shakespeare was writing Macbeth. James I was rewriting the Christian Bible, and Guy Fawkes was torn in four pieces, disemboweled, emasculated, disemboweled, cut into four pieces, and his 4 pieces or 5 pieces were sent to the realm as his head was, of course, hung, on a spear. That was 10 days before the entry in the court record, by the way. So we have a very interesting history of cases that occur before Snippy the horse, which I agree, Snippy the horse is the Typhoid Mary.
Well, that one excited me, and it's really fresh in my head because it was just such a. I'm not going to say it now, I guess, but there are certain details in that just blew my mind that I haven't really read in the cattle mutilations in general. For example, like the fact that when they opened its head for the first time, the brain was already gone.
Yep, exactly. The brain was gone with a dry brain case.
That kind of blew my mind, right? Like, and I've read up quite a few mutilation cases, and of course I've gone through the Skinwalker Ranch stuff. But your book has more detail, and not only is it more detail, but and what I love about it is that it has a lot of stuff that's really, really rare. Like, I mean, I'm always into the paranormal, and I don't come across a lot of this stuff. So, for anybody who's into the really out there, lesser known stuff, I mean, this book is really up their alley. Right.
So, you made an important, connection, I guess, establishment that, this is a phenomenon that, according to the little bit that has survived the ages, seemingly has been with us for thousands of years, if not longer, or or at least 1,000 years. I'm not sure what the fresco dated back to, but I just imagine the amount of information that we've lost over the ages in terms of these kinds of records. And I guess one can kind of extrapolate in their mind that, if we can find this kind of evidence going back that far, and I mean, that fresco, the image is striking. You have several figures. The herd looks like it's looking on, but there's a stressed kind of a distance, and there's definitely a tumultuous look to the herd. And then you have these figures surrounding this individual cow, and it's so striking. It's missing its leg. The leg is off to one side. You have this little creature that looks different than any of the other figures at the head, and then a half of a ghostly figure at the rear end, and it sets such a it's like a ghostly image of something that we don't see in the modern phenomenon. We're not unlucky enough to stumble upon one of these mutilations taking place, or at least
Right.
if anybody is, they're not talking about it, or they don't remember. But here we have this historical ancestral memory being handed down, and it's such a striking image that one can't help but see the mutilation phenomenon being played out on that fresco.
Oh, I've had a couple of people look at it, people whose analytical and observational acuity I really admire and look up to, and they've said, "Oh, it's just they're slaughtering a cow, and the other cows are kind of bummed about it, and they're worried." And I look at that, and then I look at the deeper trends in the image itself, and there are too many high strange things that don't make sense. If they're just butchering a cow, why is the right front leg off to the side, just sitting there, and nobody's near it? Why aren't they working on that? And why is that weird figure, as Will pointed out, that doesn't look like any of the other stylized figures? It looks like Casper the Friendly Ghost with this weird tool operating on the face of the animal, and the ghostly image in the back does look like a human. It's missing the lower part. That may be just because it's worn off from the fresco. It may have been there at one point. We can't really make any assumptions about that. But, I mean, it's got its arm up to the elbow inside the cow, in the rear end of the cow. I mean, there's definitely something going on there. And the cow's on its back. It's obviously dead. There's no blood anywhere. So it doesn't look like how you would imagine 5,000 years ago they would slaughter an animal. They wouldn't do it in front of all the other animals, especially at the head of the herd. I mean, it was like the lead animal was the one that was taken. And I think that really is the earliest depiction of a cattle mutilation that I can find.
Well, as a researcher, and like as you said, like when you research and you're writing your books, you don't have an agenda. You're just presenting the facts and letting the readers kind of determine what they think it is.
Well, actually, Will, I do have an agenda, and it's very simple. For decades, skeptics, academics, law enforcement, whomever, some scientists who have been even willing to talk about it, have been saying, "Oh, this is all, move along. There's nothing to see here. This is media-induced hysteria. These are naturally, scavenged animals. This is part of the natural process. There's nothing high strange about this at all. This is just, there's no story here." And that's, if I did have an agenda, it was to slam dunk that thinking back in their faces.
Well,
I mean, slam dunk it. I mean, face plant that basketball. Okay, and if I've accomplished anything, I think I've at least accomplished that.
And that's what I was gonna say is that as a researcher, you can look at like that depiction that we were just talking about, and you can say, well, this is strange, this is strange, this is strange, and then you have these scientists, which, I mean, they have to be smart, right? You can't be a scientist and be stupid, right? And they just pass it all off. And I mean, we see it again and again in various stories and throughout the book of like different law officials and politicians who just like their whole goal is to debunk it. But why? Like why debunk it? Why?
Yeah, what's the motivation? And I was very careful in the book to give, if I had the data and I considered it important in any way, shape, or form, no regard to, me being as objective as possible. Obviously, I had to cut a lot of stuff out, but I kept everything that I felt was indicative of something important that supports the debunkers, that supports the ET believers, that supports the people that think it's ritual blood sacrifice, to support the people that think that there's some sort of government monitoring going on. I wanted to present the data as as objectively as possible, as unslanted, shall we say. I didn't want to slant anything. I wanted the actual original articles or the original reports or the original interviews to speak for themselves and tell the story, instead of me trying to pick the ones that fit with my particular foregone conclusion. The only thing I wanted to do was prove that this was a true mystery and deserves attention.
Oh, yeah, certainly it does. I mean, it goes back forever. It's still happening. And, I mean, some of these cases, there's certain things that you indicate at the end of the book that I don't want to spoil yet, but it was very, very interesting.
I think disturbing would be...
Yeah, disturbing, but as being someone who eats meat,
yeah, me too. Yeah.
It's something that I think everybody who's not vegetarian should look at least, just to get
be informed.
Yeah. So I mean, let's jump back to the because I mean originally we had the cattle mutilation, but the UFO phenomenon wasn't connected yet. There's various things that weren't really
I don't know. What about the end of that 1606 James court record where they talk about, hundreds of sheep. This is February 10th, 1606. The minds of men are much troubled with a strange accident lately fallen out, which yet by no means can be discovered, about the city of London and some of the shires adjoining, so the communities around London and London. Whole slaughters of sheep have been made, in some places to number 100, in others less, where nothing is taken from the sheep but their tallow and some inward parts, the whole carcasses and fleece remaining still behind. And I love this part. Of this sundry conjectures, but most agree that it tendeth toward some fireworks.
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay, now you're saying that we don't have the UFO introduced until... actually...
Well, it wasn't, connected in so much as mainstream media.
In mainstream media, the Snippy case was absolutely... I mean, that was ground zero for the UFO meme. Absolutely. But we have all kinds of interesting little tidbits here and there that suggest that some sort of aerial, phenomenon was going on. What tendeth toward fireworks? I mean... I didn't even know they knew what the word fireworks meant in 1606. I mean, that to me, that's really intriguing.
Well, yeah, I guess they saw a lot of lights in the sky, and bad stuff happened to the cattle or the sheep in this case. So I mean, we do have this stuff kind of peppered throughout from like way back and all throughout. But as you said, it was Snippy the horse that. Was the mainstream kind of ground zero breakout case. And that was like, I've never heard of that, believe it or not. Like, it was reading your book was the first time that I came across that case, and it really blew my mind. So if you could just give a snippet to the audience of like how that whole thing played out.
Well, first of all, the Snippy case occurred September 7th, possibly the 8th, depending on what time of night it was, 1967, in the San Luis Valley, Colorado. where I ended up in the 90s for 13 years investigating all sorts of mutilations, UFOs, crypto creatures, blah, blah, blah. And my first exposure to the Snippy case happened when I was at a Safeway with my mom in 67. And I saw this lurid headline: "Flying saucers killed my horse," quote unquote. And there was a picture of this group of people looking down at this Appaloosa that had all the flesh and tissue and hide and muscles and meat removed from the tip of the nose all the way to, if you put a collar around its the bottom of its neck. So the entire neck and head were a ghostly white, bones just glistening in the sun, and the animal had been alive the day before. Several of the witnesses used terms like the bones glistened like they'd been, in the sun in the desert for 30 years. Now, this is highly unusual, obviously, and became a major news story. They tried to keep a lid on it initially through September, but by the end of September, word began to get out, and hundreds of people started trooping to the site where the horse was still laying there. The night that after it happened, a visiting resident doctor was staying at the sand dunes, and they found out that he was studying to be, I think, a hematologist, and they asked him to come and do an examination of the carcass, which he did. That was Dr. John Altshuler, who we found out many years later was the one that did that. And again, as you pointed out, Will, the brain case was empty. The upper respiratory organs were gone out of the body cavity, even though the body cavity was fairly intact, except for the neck to the nose.
And there was witnesses there as they cut the skull cap off.
Oh, yeah. No,
right?
This was a big deal. The family was there. There were other individuals there. If you go to Google Earth today, you can still see the path that was beaten by the hundreds of people that went from Highway 159 down a quarter mile into the meadow. It's to this day, you can still see the path. So this was a huge international news story. It hit the wire services in October. Reporters from as far away as France, China, South America contacted the ranchers. UFO sightings have been seen in the area the month or two prior, and then, God, for a year and a half afterwards, there was quite a big UFO wave there and other mutilation cases. And what makes this case really most interesting is, number one, the assertion that flying saucers did this to the animal, but by Nellie Lewis, the owner of the horse. Another thing that's important is the horse actually was named Lady. It was a female, but the press got the name mixed up with the lady's sire, whose name was Snippy. And so, because Snippy just had more of a ring to it, I guess nobody corrected anybody, which I think is highly significant myself. But Lady ended up, becoming one of the most famous horses in the world. I mean, you can Belleron, the Trojan horse, Pegasus, and Snippy.
I believe you can buy those bones for like $30,000.
Right, yeah. The bones are articulated in there for sale. They did I think in 2005, they did an eBay auction, and the highest bid they got was $1,800. It was probably some Japanese guy that wanted it as a tie rack.
So you got a chance to look at it, and
I did. I examined the bones, and I did find a little piece of connective tissue between two of the vertebrae. So
yeah, and
that's after the bones were boiled in lye. So
Well, that was just it, because they had said that there was absolutely no skin on the bones whatsoever. And
I found a little piece of disc between two vertebrae in the neck, just a little tiny piece of disc material.
So you were young when you came across the story of Snippy.
Yeah, I saw the magazine in the grocery store, and I had my mom buy it. It probably cost a nickel or something back then, and I devoured the story. And when I moved to the San Luis Valley in '89, of course, I remembered that this was the place where Snippy had occurred. Because the case became rather famous down through the years. I've been a closet UFO buff for years. I had my own kind of up close and personal encounter when I was 7, changed my reality view, and I was devouring every book that I could on the subject. I have quite an extensive library. And I've been a bit of a closet student, up to that point, up to when I moved there in '89. I'd been very, very quietly amassing my information base about all these subjects. And when I got to the San Luis Valley, of course, I thought all that stuff is ancient history, and I was just moving to a really beautiful, magical area. Much to my annoyance, dead cows began getting kind of hung around my neck like a garland. It's my least favorite thing to do in life. It's go out and console some big burly rancher, and his freaked out family, and have to smell the damn thing, and it's just very unpleasant. It's just not fun to do, and I've done way too many of them. I'm kind of semi-retired from the actual field work, but yeah, Snippy was a big deal. There was some really interesting facts about the case. I devote a whole chapter to the case because it is so important. I really go in depth. The crime scene evidence that was there, some of the theories that were proposed, the first time interviews with family members that have never commented publicly before. I really dug into it very intensely because I do feel it's like the typhoid Snippy, typhoid Mary case of this particular mystery, and oftentimes the most revealing clues to any mystery will be found in the first event or so.
So, along that vein, I guess this phenomenon as a whole, of course, is so all-consuming in terms of all of the different kinds of. We have ESP and paranormal and cryptozoological and extraterrestrials and extra dimensionals and black helicopters and people with firearms. There's such a plethora of anomalous events around it. It's really hard. But
unlike all other paranormal mysteries, this one leaves behind thousands of pounds of physical evidence.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the stranger aspects of it, and I guess along the lines, the two very prominent things, of course, that popped in my mind throughout the course of the book was this extra dimensional, extraterrestrial trickster aspect alongside of the black helicopters, and I remember that story about the diary and the strange gentlemen that were that nobody knew that was sighted in the vicinity when the pages of, I think it was Nellie's diary, the pages of Nellie's diary went missing.
Well, according to her, Nellie committed suicide the day they buried her mom in '76. So I never actually personally spoke with Nellie. I have tons of transcripts from interviews with her, but in 1988 or '89. The Upper Ranch, the case occurred on the King Ranch, which is south of the Great Sand Dunes in the San Luis Valley. Beautiful, just absolutely gorgeous area. Some of the earliest known traces of humans in North America are within 9-10 miles of there. And that's something that I kind of focus on a little bit in the book. It's a very, very special area. And at the time, the ranch had a lower part in the valley and then an upper part, and they sold the upper part to an educational group, and they were going up there and just cleaning out the place, and there were outbuildings there, and they wanted to clean up the garbage and haul off old cars and dead tractors, that sort of thing. And as they were rummaging through, it was a whole group of 20 or 30 people, I think, if I remember, of people volunteering to clean stuff up, and there were two guys there that were dressed in suits, but they had taken off their coats and shirts and ties, and they had their wingtips and their shirt, their slacks on, and they were helping clean up, through the afternoon. And at one point, a friend of mine, a very talented guy, who I actually have a whole section of my second book about, he happened to find it was like a loose leaf binder, and it was filled with a bunch of pages that were like notes, dates, sketches of beings, emblems, just all sorts of strange stuff. And on the inside of the binder, it had the name Nellie Lewis. Now, her husband, Burl, who I did interview, he said Nellie never had a diary, and he was very emphatic about that. But I believe Roger, he found a notebook with all these weird notations and stuff. And he called people over, and everybody kind of looked at it and said, "Wow, we should definitely, not throw that away. We should save it." And so they took it down and put it in the house, the ranch house, on the kitchen table or something. And they all went back to work. And then they noticed that these two guys were gone, and the notebook was gone. And everybody said, "Well, who were those guys?" And everybody thought it was somebody else's friend. It's just very bizarre. And I interviewed a number of people who were on that cleanup party, and I got the same exact stories separately from everybody else. So, I did, back in '93 when I first heard of this story, I really dug into it, and it's just fascinating. This kind of like you said, like a Men in Black sort of tricksterish type element is all through this mystery, and there's just absolutely no avoiding it.
Well, yeah, it actually seems like for every UFO sighting, there's a black helicopter, and and people being questioned about what they saw, or but one of the little snippets of stories in there that I have never read anywhere else, and I guess you can kind of elaborate on this, was a story that came out. It happened in 1951. And there was these wafer-thin slices of meat that actually rained from the sky over an army base, and a similar thing happened in June of 1969 over California, or a place in California.
No, you're off by 100 years. It was 18.
Well, my bad.
This was in the 1800s.
It was even worse. So,
and if you read the books of Charles Fort, who was could be considered the first real paranormal investigator. He combed through all sorts of archives for 30 years and newspaper archives, and wrote 3 very important books, Wild Towns, Low, New Lands. And in there are references to falls of meat that happened in the cases that you're talking about in California in the 1850s and 60s.
So, how does that... how do you explain that? I mean, it was actually fresh and bloody, too, from the description.
Yeah, and it had these weird kind of thick, bristly hairs coming off the edges, like where the skin was.
You think that they would have, if that happened and I was around, even if I wasn't a researcher, I'd spend time to research that, because it just seems, especially back then, right? Before, aircraft and... sometimes, as with the cattle mutilation phenomenon, the weirder the event, the less likely it is for people to pay attention, report it, investigate it. People just, when stuff that is so far beyond their realm of comprehension occurs, people tend to revert to a kind of a reboot their consciousnesses. People don't want to deal with it. They really don't. And the fact that some of these stories made the papers was because there were so many witnesses. But individual cases, individual mutilations on ranches where the animal may be found in some condition that is so unexplainable, the rancher doesn't want anybody to know about it. He doesn't want that stigma on him. He doesn't want a lot of media attention, a lot of notoriety. People must understand that the only time really that these cases are reported, these mutilation cases, is when there's an anger aspect. In other words, if something happens that's inexplicable, there's no indication of how it could have possibly happened, the rancher is more prone to hide it. But if he sees a mystery helicopter, if he sees weird lights, if he sees hooded figures, if he sees unusual traffic around his ranch, anything that makes him suspicious, like he's being victimized or being targeted by the government, by Satanists, by a neighboring rancher that may be trying to drive him out of business. There's a number of cases that are very, very well documented that show that even societal and political manipulation may be involved in some cases. But it's only when he's angry that the media is going to find out about it. There's police reports are going to be taken. Remember, these animals are left behind, so they're not stolen. So there is no crime being committed, theoretically. Yeah,
So,
theoretically.
yeah.
I think for me, one of the most telling events occurred around the Cheyenne Mountain facility, and I actually went on to Google Earth and Google Street View will actually take you right into the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo. You can actually go in and look at it from a person's eye view and look at the enclosures. And I was just floored that, you can, if you spin the camera around, you can see Cheyenne Mountain right there, the facility. I mean, we're talking about a facility that, like you stated in your book, can detect a 8 foot long chunk of wire orbiting the planet.
Or needle.
And and two different animal mutilations happened right there, or cattle mutilations.
Well, one cow mutilation and one bison mutilation.
Yes.
The cow happened within sight of the entrance to NORAD. Anytime you see the TV show Stargate and they show the entrance, if you turn around from where the camera guy is and film, that's where they found the cow. The other one occurred at the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, and that was a bison. And that is some of the most closely monitored airspace and perimeter ground surveillance on the planet. I mean, that is the Cheyenne Mountain NORAD complex there, and it's just, there's so many of these, like what appear to be obvious signals being sent by somebody to somebody.
It's
How
almost
do we
taunting.
know it wasn't one rogue government agent trying to get back at another one and freak them out? I mean, you can't really jump to conclusions based on just simple crime scene evidence. There's an underlying, it seems as if, let's put it this way, it seems as if there's multiple agendas going on. And over the years, some have ebbed and flowed and gone away. Some have entered later on. But there seems to be multiple players using this particular mystery as a way, as a means to some sort of end. And what I try to do in the book is show how each of these potential agendas have developed, where they developed, where we can first really look and say, well, this may be where this particular group started, and this may be their agenda. But I let the facts do that for me. So I don't really say, this is where I think this started. I think it's pretty obvious by reading the timeline. The book is in a timeline. It starts 30,000 years ago and ends 2 weeks before I turned the manuscript in. And I just had my latest case 3 days ago, on the Crow Indian Reservation. A bull and a bull calf were mutilated, and the bull calf survived.
So this is still very common. I mean, it's
Yeah.
Why do
Down
you
in South America, man, from 2002 to 2005, there were like at least 3,000 reports down there.
So why do you suppose that this stuff, like, it just never makes mainstream media?
Because Oprah Winfrey made a comment when she was covering the subject of mad cow disease with the mad cowboy Howard Lyman. She did a show down in Texas, and in front of a local group of ranchers, basically. And she said, at one point where she really got how horrific mad cow disease is, or transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, if you would like, misfolded proteins called prions. When she got it, she said, "I'll never eat another hamburger again," and she was instantly slapped with a $2 billion lawsuit. Okay. So that may have something to do with it. The beef industry is an incredibly powerful, very quiet lobby in this country. It's the largest producer of cash in the agricultural section. McDonald's alone buys 1 billion pounds of beef a year. People don't want to know how that thing got from the bull breeding the cow all the way to that piece of styrofoam and the chopped meat with the plastic wrapped on it with a price. People don't want to know what happens in between those two occurrences. And the same goes with the mutilations. All that does is remind us of this huge cultural black hole that we have called, meat protein, or beef protein in this case. And these are subjects that people would, ignorance is bliss. People out of sight, out of mind. Don't remind me of the next time I go to McDonald's and I have a Big Mac, there could be up to 1,000 animals represented in that beef patty. McDonald's admits up to 100. There have been other studies that suggest it could be as high as 1,000. And if there's something in the food chain that could compromise human health, environmental safety, these types of issues, then people really, it's
Big agro is not going to react
yeah,
kindly to
it's
somebody.
like when you look at
bringing
what's
that
going
out.
on in feedlots. I mean, we're getting ahead of ourselves here,
Yeah.
but I'm telling you, man, we're not going to be able to continue utilizing beef as a protein source for too many more generations, probably less, because of their incredibly detrimental effect on the environment and the potential for cataclysmic effects on human health.
Yeah, definitely for the latter. I could see that.
So, would you like to be reminded of that? I mean, all collectively, as a species, we all know this on some deep, collective subconscious level. We already know all this, and it's the individual knowledge of the facts and the figures that tend to, I don't know, just kind of make us, go into a place of waking coma or willful ignorance or willful ignorance rather. So, I think basically this is one of those self-negating mysteries that, how would I put this, has the ability to exist and be Teflon. No helicopters have been shot down. No occultists have been arrested. We did have in 1902 a guy in England arrested for horse slashing, but he got off because of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the guy that wrote Sherlock Holmes. So we have societal manipulation. We have this environmental monitoring theory, which I think is the strongest of all the theories. I'm not sold on it. It doesn't answer all the cases. It's not a one size fits all answer, but I think a majority of cases may be some form of environmental monitoring, and we can go into that in depth. You have this food chain thing, as I mentioned before, this potential for delivering a societal control mechanism through food, for instance.
I would actually like to ask you a little bit about the little more, I guess, the darker aspect of this whole phenomenon. I know we're jumping around quite a bit, but the whole human mutilation aspect, I think, is something that is very rarely, if ever, talked about. And I was extremely impressed to see that you included that photograph in the book.
Well, it was one of a number of autopsy photographs. Yeah, I didn't want to. I kind of went back and forth on it, but I felt it was important not to state something and not show, some sort of visual evidence of the horrific nature of that particular case. And it is a standalone case, believe me.
And you use the words horrific, and it most certainly is. Anybody with who's squeamish, don't go and look it up on the internet, because how many autopsy photos did you have in the book? Was it just the one? Was the face, wasn't it?
I just did the face, and I that was actually a section of the entire photograph. I did do I didn't show the entire upper torso.
Yeah, because it is a pretty gruesome set of photographs. So be warned, anyone who's jumping on Google right now. They are there on the internet. They are extremely gruesome, but I think it underlines a very important point that I guess you made regarding the search that a friend of yours had put in on the crime database and the results they got back from that. I thought that was kind of disturbing.
Yeah, and one of the few complete pieces that I included in the book, written by somebody else, that I quoted in its entirety, was Don Ecker's human mutilation article. Don Ecker has been a long-time researcher, investigator. He's an ex-cop, I think in Pennsylvania. He started UFO magazine with his wife Vicky. He's got the Dark Matters radio program that's been a successful show on Cyberstation USA. Don is someone who I have an immense amount of respect for. His lunar anomaly work, I think, is world class. He's one of the top experts in that particular realm. And back after he had been in law enforcement back in the 80s, he started looking into this whole subject of human mutilations. And as you know, an insider guy in law enforcement, you would think that he would have the ability to dig in and find cases and find some sort of documentation on cases that he felt were pretty strong in terms of rumors of cases occurring, and he just absolutely met a stone wall. And the same is true with my attempts over the years to dig into some cases that I've heard about. Some more research oriented, some more real time, and time and time again, I just it didn't matter who I knew, it didn't matter how much subtle pressure I could you know put to the situation to try to get people to at least say yes, we do have a case, just to get them to acknowledge the case was real was very difficult. And the way that they didn't acknowledge the case indicated to me that it was real. In other words, people didn't say, "What? That's crazy. What are you joking?" I mean, the natural reaction of somebody that had not been exposed to the case. Instead, it was instant defensiveness, paranoia, sort of, "Well, why do you want to know?" Those types of questions that for someone like me who's interviewed thousands of people, I mean, you can pick up on people, recoiling and going, "Oh God, how am I going to deal with this situation?" And, to me, this is a very real phenomenon. It is probably the least likely story to be acknowledged by law enforcement. It's the least likely story that you're going to see, I think, in the media. These cases are extremely sensitive. And over the years, I included some of the rumors, some that are equivocal at best, others that come from possibly questionable sources. But I wanted to at least give a sense of what is out there for people to latch onto and make a decision one way or another whether it's real. And I was very careful backtracking on this whole section, but we do have in Africa every day people are mutilated by other people. If you're suspected of witchcraft in Africa, parts of Nigeria, the Congo, you have hell to pay. If there's any sort of evidence or any groundswell of village indignation, horrific things happen all the time around this world. Humans mutilating other humans. There's all sorts of stories of mutilations. The Sand Creek Massacre, the cavalrymen who wiped out the, I think it was the Cherokee on Sand Creek there on the Front Range of Colorado. They cut out the reproductive, the vulvas of women and, the penises of men, and they brought them back as trophies. This is something that most people don't want to think about for obvious reasons, but it's an aspect of warfare and conflict that has gone on for thousands of years, probably longer. People think, "Oh man, if the Indians got you, they'd scalp you," and that's an Indian thing. No, the Indians didn't used to scalp people. That they were taught how to do that by the French and the British to prove that they killed somebody. Well, you got to bring me back, proof. In Vietnam, long-range rangers would collect the ears of killed enemy and wear them in garlands around their necks. So this is a very distasteful subject for the average person who is not aware of these types of facts. And that particular small part of a chapter called, I think, Bizarre Mutilations, gives a sense of the cultural revulsion that we have surrounding the potential for these types of cases.
Yeah, I found that especially disturbing myself. Obviously, when we are the target, we can kind of live with the idea that it's cows because it's not us being diced up, but when it's us and the possibility that it could be us, it's obviously very, very scary.
Well, we mutilate thousands of cattle every hour in this country, and most people don't have a clue.
Yeah, I never think of that stuff. If I had to kill my own meat to eat it, I wouldn't. Just
I actually don't live very far from the rendering plants north of, I guess it's a little north and east of Calgary here. And a good friend of mine actually worked in the rendering plants, repairing the machines. And he described in detail exactly all the different types of machinery, such as hide pullers and spinal fluid vats and all these things, part augers, and really it kind of turned me off from beef for a while.
is that when you went through your vegetarian?
And let's not forget that beef are not only a food source. There's thousands of
Cosmetics,
products,
deodorants, yeah.
thousands of products that rely on parts from rendered livestock.
Yeah.
So, in the theme of jumping all over the place, as we've been doing thus far, the connection, like, I just like to point out the connection between, like when we were talking in the beginning about ritual sacrifice of cattle and, or like when certain religious sects would eat it, that they would drain the blood. But, I mean, as we see in cattle mutilations, even to modern times, one of the things that is common is that the blood is actually drained. What connection do you see in that?
I would kind of beg to differ with your assertion that most of the cases are drained of blood. I just don't find that to be true. I don't know how many. I lost count of how many cases I went out, investigated. When I was done getting, if the animal was fresh enough, I'd get forensic samples, plant and soil samples. I'd do magnet drags for magnetite. I'd, do all sorts of scientific protocols depending on the case. And, the rancher would say, well, they obviously drained this animal of blood. And I'd look at it and go, well, we'll see. And at the end of the investigation, before I left, I go, you want to see where all the blood is? All the, what's left of it. Most of the moisture wicks out, and you have just, hemoglobin and constituent elements in the blood. All you have to do is get a big burly guy or two and flip that animal over, and whoosh, it all comes out. Gravity takes the blood and puts it into the bottom of the body cavity out of sight. And unless you flip it over,
it'll stay there.
Yeah, you're not gonna know that there's blood in there. There have been cases, and I've had a couple where if you cut into the meat appears gray or appears slightly pink, which does indicate that there has been some sort of potential pressure that's been exerted to remove blood and fluids. There have been countless cases of what appear to be, jugular vein or main vein sort of tapping into the animal to possibly allow the animal to pump itself dry, for instance. But these cases are not common. These are exceptions. The cases where the animal appears to have been drained of blood and fluids, the vast majority, in my estimation, have not been drained of blood and fluids. In fact, the reason why the wounds don't bleed in a lot of cases is because, the animal's dead and there's no blood pressure, and wounds don't bleed unless you have blood pressure in the animal. That's, and going on that particular line of thinking, as soon as the media gets involved in a series of cattle mutilations, every dead cow out there appears to be mutilated to somebody who doesn't know what they're looking at. And a lot of cases have entered into the databases that are misidentified scavenger action. And in some sense, the debunkers and skeptics are very, they're right on. A lot of these cases are mundane. They just appear strange to someone that doesn't know what they're looking at. I'm not a veterinary pathologist. I've never claimed to be. I'm way more up to speed than the average person about what to look for. What are some of the scientific processes that are going on that are to a veterinary pathologist, I mean, he's the only person that can tell you, how an animal died and what happened to it after it died. So, there are a lot of misidentified scavenger action cases out there, and I'll be the first to, remind everybody of that. But if an animal's dead and a scavenger comes and tears off the bag or manages to carve out the rear end, if there's no blood pressure, it's not going to bleed. So those bloodless, not bleeding incision areas can fool, an amateur observer. And it's only when you really get into real in-depth necropsies on animals where they can do workups on blood and fluids and really throw the powers of diagnostic science, forensic science at the equation. That's when you really come up with some interesting results if it is a true case. And I do cite all throughout the book veterinary pathology reports that indicate animals have been cut with a sharp implement. This whole idea of laser cuts, for instance. Oftentimes when an animal has been scavenged and they tear out the bag, the edge of that wound will dry out. And when the animal bloats, it stretches. When the animal goes back to its original or smaller size, those areas that have dried out won't stretch back. And so they appear slick, they appear glistening, darkened, like they've been burnt. It's only when you have cooked hemoglobin and evidence of high heat around the incision area that the animal, you could say the animal had some sort of laser or some sort of heat applied to the cutting, to cut the animal. And out of all the cases that I had tested, I think it's 16 total out of 200. 3 of the cases came back, 4 came back possible high heat, 2 had cooked hemoglobin. So, there's a lot of misnomers that have been kind of pop culture cliches that have been applied to this. Cookie cutter incision. I hear that all the time. We only have a handful of cases. I mean, 3, maybe 4 out of tens of thousands potentially that have exhibited this really mind-blowing pinking shear scissor type effect on the wounds. And this has been touted, everybody thinks that a cow, when it's mutilated, it has cookie cutter, laser cut incisions. It's just absolutely not true. These are just a handful of cases.
So in general, for the cases that you've personally been in person, would you say that the mutilation could have been done by humans? Did it seem like you'd have to be very skilled, or is there any ammo for the people who say it was Satanist cults that just?
Yeah, there is. And again, this is kind of a Cliff Note version, sort of a generalized version, but basically what it appears to me is the initial cases of a wave are the high strange ones, the ones that are if we even hear about them, we're lucky. I think there's quite a number of cases that are just covered up by the rancher because they're just so spooky. But the ones that the word does get out of the initial high strange cases, they tend to attract what appear to be red herring cases that appear in the same region, but 30, 40 miles away. There's about a 40-mile square that seems to be, you have cases around it, and those are red herring cases that, in my estimation, appear to be done skillfully by humans. As soon as the media gets involved, then you have your misidentified scavenger cases. Very rarely people going out on a lark to kill a cow and attempt to mutilate it. There are some ritual occult cases, and by ritual occult cases, I mean there's something left behind that would indicate there's some sort of ritual act going on, whether it's a candle, whether it's hooded figures seen in the area. Had one report from La Magnum Pass where the animals' parts that were taken were hung in a bag in a tree over the animal, and there was a burnt down candle on the skull of the mutilated animal. That to me is a cult ritual sign. These are very rare cases, though. I mean, the vast majority of these cases appear to be done skillfully by individuals to animals. The higher strange cases appear to have elements that are really difficult to explain. But a vast majority of these, I do have a sense, and this is my opinion, appear to be done by human groups very skillfully, oftentimes aided by helicopters, and oftentimes in areas downwind and downstream of where we utilize uranium, mine it, enrich it, weaponize it, and put it into nuclear power plants and missile silos. Okay, if you go downwind and downstream from those areas, chances are you're going to hit a region of high incidence for mutilations. Also, the dispersion pattern of 100 above ground nuclear tests at the Nevada test site. If you go downwind and downstream, that also there's this cross correlation of high areas of high incidence. So there appears to be an environmental monitoring program going on that may be the explanation for a sizable percentage of cases.
So what we're saying basically is that there's more than one perpetrator.
Yeah,
that's
multiple
doing
groups with multiple agendas piggybacking those agendas.
Yes.
It almost paints a picture of, you get this high strange case appear, and then where a single head of cattle or a few head of cattle are involved in a real, high strangeness case, and then all these black helicopter, it's almost like they're coming in to see what this high strangeness was all about.
Yeah, well,
and then you get all the
check
copycats.
and see what they're looking for.
Yeah, then you have all these copycats that may crop up, and so you have such a melting pot of
Well, and then you have the misidentified scavenger action. You have hoaxers. You have possible ritual magicians coming in saying, "Well, if there's something important going on here, maybe there's some energy that we can tap into." That kind of rationale. So I see it as a cascading of events, really. And the media is very important, because if the media doesn't get involved and this doesn't get reported, you don't see that cascading occur. It gets nipped off at the bud.
Well, it's interesting because if you looked at it from the point of view of like a secret group or like government or something like that, and the media has already gone nuts with the cattle mutilation and the alien abduction and stuff like that. If you were going to run a program where you were testing, like you said, if it was downwind from uranium enrichment sites and stuff like that, and you wanted to test to see how the chemicals were reacting with local wildlife or whatever, why not go after cows? Because as far as the media and the rest of the world is concerned, is that all the cows are, it's aliens doing this, right? Not the government. You know what I mean?
Well, that's because, for the past 30 years, the only person really publicly willing to go out there and really put her neck on the chopping block has been Linda Howe. And that's, she feels that these are aliens coming down to gather genetic material for some sort of hybridization project. When people say that, well, Chris, come on, you should know that that's what's going on. My stock answer is, well, if they want genetic material, why not pick a lock on a rendering plant or an abattoir and go in there and get as much as they could possibly need? I mean, hello? Obviously, it's the environment. It's where in the environment the animal is grazing and living that's important. And people say, well, why don't the government just get their own cows and rent their own pasture? They do. That's a simple answer. So, it's the societal manipulation, the political aspect of this that I think is also important, because many of the areas of high incidence tend to be where we have more militia groups, more vigilante-minded ranching communities, more patriot types out there. And, like I said earlier, there's a couple of really good cases. One that I investigated that indicates that, a rich rancher trying to buy out neighboring ranches used the mutilation phenomenon as a means of intimidation. I mean, I have one rancher living right next door to a huge ranch who lost 49 head in 2 weeks. The first was shot, the next was stolen, and then the others were mutilated.
Yeah, that would send a message.
You think?
Yeah.
70% of cattle ranching operations that were thriving in the mid 70s are now gone, out of business. And in their place are these huge super agro feedlots, industrialized protein raising.
And I
So
guess, yeah,
check
and
that
you
out.
outline a lot of the dangers involved with centralizing our food production like that. And I guess that's really what, pardon the pun, gets into the meat of what we're, we look at the diseases, and I guess it was in the 1950s when a low or a shipment of infected brains was shipped to North America, and we have the introduction of this new. Well, I guess even then they didn't understand, but the introduction of the prion.
Right. And those were human brains, by the way, not cattle
Yes,
brains that were
yes.
imported. Yeah, the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1976 was Daniel Gujek, who was the first one to isolate and identify kuru, which is a degenerative form of transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. You could call kuru mad human disease, that they thought at the time was caused by the 4A tribes people in Papua New Guinea who had this disease, very rare, very primitive people too, cargo cults type people in New Guinea. When an ancestor would die, when a grandfather would die, depending on who it was, they would eat the brain as a ritual after he died. And the thinking at the time was that this contributed to the spread of mad human disease, or kuru. And Daniel Gujek got the Nobel Prize for Medicine for identifying this. And he is thought to have brought some of these brains back to play around with at the Army Chemical Corps, possibly Dugway, the Rocky Mountain Biophysical Lab, and other labs that were playing around with coming up with defenses against weaponized pathogens. And I mean, if this 100% fatal disease could be weaponized, that would be quite a weapon, right? So in the 50s, maybe they were playing around with this. This is all conjecture. It comes from a very good book called Brain Trust by microbiologist Colm Kelleher, who was one of the co-authors of Hunt for the Skinwalker, worked for NIDS, National Institute for Discovery Sciences. Brain Trust. I really recommend this book highly. And he traces the smoking gun evidence that suggests that this weaponization or defense project may have gotten out into the environment. They may have accidentally let it escape into the deer and elk herds in Colorado in the mid 60s, right when the Snippy case happened. So it's a bit of a detective story when you start looking at how, we get a hold of some rare pathogen that's 100% fatal and get all paranoid and think, well, maybe somebody could use this against us. We have to study it so that we can have a defense for it, and it gets loose into the food chain. You wouldn't want to tell everybody and freak everybody out and get sued like Oprah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
because the
what would
military
you
did
do?
have.
You'd create these really highly trained, sophisticated teams to go out and monitor the environment to make sure it ain't spreading.
And that's where we get to the cattle mutilation.
Exactly.
Well,
And it's not like the military doesn't already have a history of either accidentally releasing neurotoxins and wiping out
Yeah, it's
entire.
68, man. A year after, or was it 66? Even before, I forget. The Dugway Proving Grounds killed what 5,000-6,000 head of sheep when
Yes.
a valve on their plane that was spewing out this cloud of VX nerve gas on the Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. The valve didn't shut off, and I love the name of the place that got hit. Skull Valley ranchers then had thousands of sheep killed.
Well, on the topic of how we were just saying, that the mad cow, like how they would take and mutilate the cows to make to check for mad cow disease or whatever. The NIDS, you mentioned in the book that the NIDS actually did studies on, and it showed that the mutilation of cows is actually simpler to the sample methodologies for infectious diseases.
Yeah, exactly. These are the organs that are excised, taken away, that humans most often get cancer in, for instance. They're the organs that have the most recent evidence, scientific evidence of the cattle's environment. In other words, the tongue will tell you what it's licking. The reproductive organs will tell you what's being passed along to offspring. The mammary glands, the milk, will show how it's being processed through the animal and then being given to offspring. So, yeah, there is a correlation, big time. The eyeball, oftentimes, the ocular fluid, can have some pretty scientifically important indications of the animal's environment. The one case that NIDS touted in one of the few papers that they published was finding potassium chloride in the ocular fluid, the eyeball fluid of a mutilated cow. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that what we use in gas chambers? Is it potassium chloride? I don't know. My chemistry is a little.
Well, potassium chloride, I do believe it's just salt.
Okay, maybe it was sodium. I'm not sure, but they found some nasty.
Or no,
noxious-
yes, sorry, sodium chloride is salt. Potassium, I believe you're right. I believe you're right. It is a gas. It is a lethal gas.
Yeah. Well, what's that doing in a cow? They had another cow that it appeared that we've had cases where it appeared that the hemoglobin had been spun out in a centrifuge, and drips of pure compacted hemoglobin were found on two cases. We've had cases where animals exhibit an abnormal amount of copper in their blood. And the less copper you have in your blood, the less likely you are to get mad cow disease.
So
The more copper you have in your blood, the more prone you are to prion disease.
which is
So there's all
and-
sorts of interesting, it's a Gordian knot, basically, that you have to unravel. That's basically why the subtitle of the book is Unraveling the Cattle Mutilation Mystery. This is so complex. There are so many fields of science. There are so many players. Daniel Gujek won the, he brought the brains back to the Army Chemical Corps and others probably. He won the Nobel Prize in '76. 12 years later, the Nobel Prize, or what was it, 22 years later, the Nobel Prize for Medicine was given Stanley Prusner, who identified the prion for the first time. And you haven't heard anything from these guys since then. It's almost like, here's your Nobel, here's your $1 million. Thanks a lot for nothing. Goodbye. We don't want to hear from you. Gujek actually was set up for child molestation charges later, when he may have begun to start talking about things. It's a real mystery. I equate this as the greatest unsolved serial crime spree in history.
well,
And it's really indicative, I guess, when you take into account that the coring samples and the eye scoops and the tongue removal, though it all resembles the methods that were later discovered. The phenomenon predates the discovery of these methods by 20 years or more, like you said.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, that's something David Perkins and I, who David was my research mentor in this last 20 years, spent hundreds and hundreds of hours helping me on this book. Because we were unable to really throw the mud against the wall, or I threw the mud against the wall, all the data, I didn't have room in the book to actually analyze it. So David and I are going to do a second volume that looks at the mud and sees and analyzes what sticks. So this is really important when you start analyzing this. One of the things that comes up is there is, as you just pointed out, Ryan, there is smoking gun evidence to suggest that certain scientific discoveries had been made up to 20 years prior to the actual then acknowledgement by science of something. So there appears to be a really super up-to-speed aspect of our control structure scientifically that is monitoring things that won't even be known as developments 20 years later. And that's a good point. That's really important.
So if we look at it as a whole, I mean, we can take the idea that the government is sampling. Most of the mutilation cases are probably the government sampling them to check for stuff like mad cow disease. But then we do still have those rare cases that we really can't explain. So I mean, is this a case of that we just can't explain it, we don't know what it is, or like do you think that there actually is something really paranormal with those cases?
I do. And, I tend to look at things from a closed system context, Occam's razor. We live on Earth, so it's probably, these are things are happening on Earth. So let's look at all the earthbound explanations first before we jump off planet. And, for 20 years, I've been grounding myself with this methodology in terms of my analytical thinking. We can't factor ETs out, and I don't think we can factor them in yet. So let's exhaust all closed system explanations and motivations, scenarios, what have you. And what I have come up with is the possibility that there has always been something mutilating cattle on this planet. And it's something that may have been the inspiration, I guess, thousands of years ago for humans to start sacrificing animals to the gods.
That's an interesting point.
And every day, thousands of animals are sacrificed to the gods. I mean, that's probably a low number. In this country, thousands of animals. Around the world, possibly millions. I mean, Santeria, Candomblé. I mean, you can go down the belief systems around the world, including Santeria here, and some Voodoo rituals here in the United States, protected by the Constitution. 1 million people, I think, in 97 or 98 were estimated to be belonging to Santeria, which routinely sacrifices chickens and other animals to the Orishas. So animal sacrifice is, again, one of those closet subjects that especially in this country and in the West, is just something out of sight, out of mind. Ignorance is bliss. Okay, people kill animals and they sprinkle the blood around and they dance and the Orishas mount them and take over their body functions and they speak in tongues. And, fundamentalist Christians are, in my book, are, I think, hopefully people don't take this wrong, but I think they need to reassess their belief system. But compared to Santeria and Candomblé and other religions that are highly evolved for something so primitive, I mean, there's a lot of people that have beliefs on this planet that involve the ritual blood sacrifice of animals. Okay, so just because it ain't front page news in this country or even in the textbooks doesn't mean it's not real and has very highly significant cultural implications. See, this whole mutilation mystery exists within a blind spot. It's like a 6,000-pound gorilla that has been in the closet, for millennia and is now sitting on the coffee table, but everybody's like pretending it's not there. It's like, no, I want to go to the fast food restaurant and get that fast food hamburger. It's so easy to throw a steak on the Barbie. And these are status symbols for the West, okay? The more and more third world countries gain a middle class, they gain some sort of affluence, they're going to want to be like us. They're going to want to have a steak on the grill. So we're on this downward slope where we're going to have to be producing more and more cattle, cutting down more and more rainforest to make room for cattle in order for people to feel like they've reached the big time as a culture. Am I making sense here?
Yeah, well,
certainly.
It's the media that plays such a big role in our culture.
It's Madison Avenue, dude. It's all the billions of dollars being spent, on Ronald McDonald's and Burger King's that creepy.
Yeah, it is creepy. It is creepy.
I mean, just the whole thing around it. It's all, they use clowns. They use, tricksterish kings. We're being tricked into thinking that this is how, the good life is. This is how it should be. No, I'm not saying I'm a vegetarian. I eat meat. I just had a prime rib dinner 2 nights ago, but I knew where that meat came from. Okay, so it's grain-fed, free range, or it's grass-fed, free range, not grain-fed from a feedlot. The processed meat industry is where some major problems may arise in the future in the food chain, human health. Okay, if you don't know where that meat comes from, you're playing Russian roulette. Let's just leave it at that.
So everything at McDonald's is a hot dog. It's
well, what's the old
point,
cliche about you don't ask where how the sausage got made, or you don't want to know where it comes from or whatever. I mean, you can just kind of. The Chinese just bought the largest producer of pork in the world, Smithfield Farms. And it was, tied up in Congress for quite a while because they were thinking, let the Chinese make all our bacon. It's like, well, they already are supporting all our bacon. Might as well let them produce it too,
Well, it's interesting that McDonald's, their beef supply company, I believe, is called 100% Pure Beef, which lets them put on every box made with 100% pure beef, right?
Yeah, but that's only, 12 to 18% of what's in a hamburger.
Exactly, right? So it's interesting that they'd have that name so that they could use it in that way, right?
Well, then we're getting into the whole idea of, why, you see on the news, oh my God, there's an E. coli outbreak. Okay, if you bought lot number, blah, 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 packaged spinach, from this time period to this time period, don't eat it. You know why most of those E. coli outbreaks take place?
Why?
The fecal overflow.
Some of the feedlots sometimes get flooded out, and then it gets sprayed, as agriculturally produced groundwater, to water plants or used, to fertilize and water plants. It just gets passed along in the food chain, and then you have these pandemic outbreaks. And we're looking at the tip of the iceberg on this whole thing. I don't want to sound like Chicken Little claiming the sky is falling, but man, cattle are the largest single polluters of fresh water. And the CIA in 2000 did a study. What are going to be the main concerns in the next 50 years? Number one on the list was water. And so if we got all these cattle polluting, a diminishing resource that's absolutely vital for the survival of life, people got to wake up. Hello, smack, smack, smack.
Yeah,
I really like the way that you brought together the idea. We of course we talk about animal sacrifice as being a very barbaric and very primal kind of activity to be partaking in. But you point out how we've merely sucked all the spiritualism out of it and then industrialized it and like you said, behind closed doors. People don't want to talk about Santeria in the United States. It's not a real big thing here in Canada. There are practitioners, but nowhere near the kind of numbers there are in the United States. And of course, we put all of our animal sacrificing behind closed doors in huge factories, and there's I find that a very interesting parallelism between the two, where we look our nose down at one while we eat our hamburger upwind of the rendering plants.
Okay, well, I'll go you one better. I was raised a good old Irish Catholic boy. I was the head of the altar boys. I knew the Mass forwards and backwards, but I also knew about the Council of Nicaea and how all these tenets of the Catholic Church were first arrived at in the 3rd and 4th and 5th century A.D.
When the Bible was
so
compiled.
I was a bit of a thorn in the priest side, but you're talking about this weird ambivalence or I don't know, the revulsion of animal sacrifice. What do you do in the Catholic Mass? You partake of the body of Christ. Okay, now if that's okay, eating the body of Christ, then eating an animal or sacrificing an animal, I mean, God allowed his son to be sacrificed, so, all these other sacrifices kind of pale in comparison. So think of the subconscious, huge collective, get out of free card going on here.
Oh yeah, well the Bible is rife with sacrifice. I mean that's something that
Get out the instructions of exactly how to sacrifice an animal for what purpose.
Yeah, I mean actually I've been reading a bit of it lately just because of the guy we interviewed Ryan interviewed him. He didn't come on the show, but there's a big religious aspect to it, and it got me trying to find the stories that correlated to what he was talking about. And so I'm after going through a bit in the Bible recently, and man, we're not just talking like little sacrifices, like we slice his throat, but we're talking like burnt offerings, really brutally, sacrificed animals, and it was like expected. Like in the Bible, it was like God commanded, like he expected it. I believe they even made a tent.
He commanded Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, and then said, psych.
Yeah, I mean,
never mind.
There's all kinds.
Well, I like the part in the first chapter of the book. Holy cow is what I named the chapter for various obvious reasons. When you read it, I love the part where you're going through there and stuff, and then you look at Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. And then going up to the mountain for 40 days, coming back, and they built a golden calf, not a golden bull because they didn't have enough gold. And then this revisionist religious historian came up with this ingenious theory that Aaron and his brother Moses were actually leaders of bull cults that were started in Egypt and survived as they left Egypt, and they were actually, the heads of bull cults. And if you look at Michelangelo's famous statue of Moses, he's got cow horns. I love that.
Another interesting point that you made in there was how like in the Bible they use lamb's blood as like protection, like they look like took a leg of a lamb and like wiped the blood on the door and stuff like that, but in the beginning, of course, everyone worshipped like cows and stuff like that, and because they're more expensive to sacrifice, there was this theory that's why they switched to lambs, is that it was cheaper.
Financial,
right? Yeah, the Mithra cults. In the first century BC through the first century AD, Rome was in turmoil. The pantheistic system was under fire. There was these monotheistic solar cults and bull cults with the Mithra tradition that have been very, very powerful for hundreds of years in the East, and were now being imported into Rome. This is when Rome was really in an upheaval. And then you have the emerging Christian cults. And when you went to be baptized in the Mithra cults, you went into an underground pit that had a grating over the top, and they led a special sacrificial bull over the top of you down in the pit, and they cut its throat, and you were baptized in the blood of the bull. Now, that's expensive, So why not just substitute an expensive animal for a lamb? The blood of the lamb. I mean, it just seems more cost effective, and at the same time, let's adopt their days when they have their major ceremonies, and change our ceremonies to match them. And it's pretty interesting the way you see Christianity marginalize and preempt the Mithra cults and become, one of the largest belief systems on the planet today. 1.5 billion, Roman Catholics are out there today. So, you have to look at the underpinnings of our relationship with cattle, how we domesticated them, how we worshiped them, what form that worship took, how that worship divided into two separate kinds of worship, and how that has become a ceremony. It was a very ceremonious, sacred thing back then, and now it is the exact opposite. It is unceremonious, ritualized behavior that we see in the feedlots, and trying to, you know, subsidize beef so that a hamburger, instead of costing $10 or $12 like it should, only costs, $1. It takes 16 to 1,700 pounds of grain to fatten up a calf before it gets slaughtered. Okay, and they're supposed to be eating grass. They're supposed to be moving around. They're penned up in these horrific conditions where they're, knee deep in feces and urine. And so you have to pump them full of antibiotics. 80% of the antibiotics used in the United States go into cattle to inoculate them from getting sick from living in their own shit, so to speak. I hope I can say that.
Oh yeah, you can say it.
Yeah, I mean, they're waiting around by the tens and hundreds of thousands in their own shit, basically. So you have to pump them full of antibiotics so they don't get sick, and you need to get them out of there quicker, so you pump them full of growth hormones.
Yeah,
and that's why that happens. And I think 60% of the growth hormones go into cattle. 80% of the antibiotics do. You check my facts on that. I'm not sure. I know 80% of the antibiotics go into cattle. So we've gone from this sacred relationship
to very
this unceremonious relationship that is compromised and has to be, dealt with in order not to impact human health. And we're throwing the environment out of the equation practically here.
Well, I mean, they're even doing tests, just to make sure that they can continue to, not get sued and make their money. I mean, it's really just a big industrialized money grab. I mean, that's when you cut it.
It's the largest income producing source in agriculture. Okay, you know who the largest exporters of beef are?
Who?
The Indians. They don't eat it.
Well, I guess, they would know.
India is the largest exporter of beef. Most of it's buffalo, true buffalo, not bison like in America, but true buffalo. But yeah, they are the largest exporter of beef in the world because they don't eat it. You know how many McDonald's are in India?
I would say a lot. No, none.
270 out of 17,000.
Yeah, and
none of them serve beef.
None of them serve beef. Now, I know I'm going to be jumping way off topic here, but there's one particular story that it really, really stuck in my head that you kind of touched upon, and is that of John Click, I believe his name was, an ex-Marine. In the early 1990s, he was driving down a highway and apparently spotted some hairless creature with yellow skin. It looked something like a cross between a scorpion and
bizarre.
And then of course there's the subsequent story of a gentleman finding some bizarre crayfish amphibian hybrid locked in ice.
It kind of looked like what Click had reported earlier. Yeah. Again, thank you for bringing that up, Ryan. That was in the bizarre mutilation section.
Yeah.
That is a standalone case. I have never heard another case like it. This translucent creature was spotted by Click as he was driving along. He was a truck driver delivering stuff, I think in Kansas, if I'm not mistaken, in Nebraska.
He was going between Campbell to Upland, Nebraska.
Yeah, Nebraska. And he saw this thing, and it had what appeared to be some sort of tube that was coming out of the creature into the base of the cow skull, and there appeared to be liquid coming out of it. It had these weird legs that were clamped around the top of the cow. It was on its back, behind its neck, on its spine, and it was clamped on, and it was sucking something out of the cow. It freaked him out. Click. It freaked him out quite a bit. He actually became a minister, I think, at some point afterwards. He found Jesus. But the juxtaposition of that particular description and the discovery of what is alleged to be a crypto sort of hybrid scorpion, sort of weird, almost a crab or lobster or something, I put that in there. kind of tongue in cheek. I mean, because it is a single case, I mean, there's no way that it could have any relevance, with the big picture, obviously. But these are the kinds of reports that have been filed by very earnest people who I really believe that that Reverend Click or whatever, that he had this experience. It was, I think, the Journal of the Bizarre, I think, was the initial source for that story. And it was published in a journal, a bizarre journal, but it was published in a journal, and I felt that it was definitely bizarre. So why not put it in the chapter about bizarre mutilations? Of course,
Well,
I've gotten
I think it really
dogged about it.
does underline the point that whenever we think we have a handle on exactly what's happening, there's something like this slips in. And I mean, I can't help but go back to it, but it just so reminds me of a expanded, more aggressive kind of a system similar to what it seemed to be going on the Skinwalker Ranch, where you have this phenomenon that could repeat itself time after time after time, and then all of a sudden it does a 180 and it's doing something else.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right. It didn't really ever do exactly the same thing ever. That's what was the most frustrating thing for the NIDS guys up at Skinwalker. It never did replicate. It came close. They had very similar types of events occur, but not within a controlled, monitored environment that they could say was being replicated from another event. So there is, in terms of the scientific method, there is a a difference there. So I just wanted to correct you on that.
Yes. Well, I was referring to more so where the anecdote or anecdotal evidence coming from the family that lived there, where they reported seeing these certain lights all the time, and then there was these certain events that would occur. But then once NIDS got there, it was like everything just went up in the air.
Yeah, that I understand your point. Yeah, as soon as you start to observe something, you're going to change it.
The observer phenomenon, yeah.
Right, and the scientific, that's some of the underpinnings of quantum physics. The Heisenberg effect, or the Copenhagen interpretation of the Heisenberg observer effect. The problem that we have is the Trickster, and that's my last book, Stalking the Tricksters, was a perfect prelude to go into Stalking the Herd, and my next book will probably be Stalking the Stalkers. But it's really important to understand that there is a reflective nature involved in this phenomenon, and that is magnified as soon as you put attention on it. As soon as you put the focus of scientific scrutiny, you get all your network of skywatchers all lined up and organized. As soon as you do that, as you said, it almost throws you an exact opposite, ultimate freaking slider, curveball. For instance, I came up with this pattern for the mutilations that they would occur 2 days before, during, or 2 days after a full or a new moon. Most of the time, a full moon. And boy, I got all my cases started coming in, boom, right in in lines with that hypothesis. As soon as I opened my mouth and published something about it, it did an about face and did the exact opposite.
So there's like an intelligence, or it's hard to put into words, but what if like your own consciousness?
There's a trickster mechanism at work that topples whatever static structure gets too entrenched. So if you have that particular structure entrenched in your mind, and you're the only one, I mean, we're talking the impetus is on you as the only person coming up with this theory. So you have a much more potential for the trickster to become involved because you've singled yourself out for the trickster. You put a spotlight on yourself. So, and the same goes in science, I think, in many ways. You can go, many examples of scientists, what was it? Not the anomalon. It was some particle that could only be detected in communist country scientific labs. And it took quite a number of replications of that in iron block countries before finally the Western Bloc was able to duplicate those scientific results. I mean, that would be a classic example of this observer effect and somehow having a tricksterous mechanism going on.
So it's almost like our consciousness is wired to something.
It's not our consciousness; it's our super consciousness, the collective. It's the the collective of our consciousness that's hardwired together, and we're just individual synapses within that matrix or within that system. This whole, I think, the cattle mutilation mystery is, if not the most important and most has the most potential for really coming up with some groundbreaking knowledge. I can't think of another one that does. And the fact that I, for some reason, was selected to write the only book that really deals with this, how name me the single book that defined ghost, hauntings or crop circles or abductions, So, I feel I was kind of destined almost to do this. But at the same time, I had this tremendous responsibility not to spin any particular scenario into the reader's mind, let you totally look at the data and help me come up with an analysis for it. This is a challenge to the reader to get in contact with me and say, hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? This is a clarion call for creative thinkers out there to have the perfect petri dish of cultural experience to come up with some really creative thinking. There's no other book about a single subject of the paranormal that can match this, and I mean that. I say that proudly.
It's an important book.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I guess I'd like to bring my personal thoughts. When I came away, and I honestly, just at the end of this conversation here, I'm sitting here, and of course I'm pondering all the things you're saying. It really does seem that whatever the phenomenon is, that we are inexorably linked to it, and there is some kind of feedback loop where when we get involved, there is a reaction. And I think, to me, it indicates at the very least that we are connected intimately with this phenomenon and it with us.
I've used the word I've said over the years that we have an incestuous relationship with cattle. I mean,
yes.
They've been using pure cattle hemoglobin to keep guys on the battlefield alive until they can get them back to the ER. I mean, we have a virtual genetic match with cattle hemoglobin. If you're a universal donor, you have no problems getting a transfusion of cattle hemoglobin to get you back to the ER if you had your leg blown off or something. Artificial blood, I think, is patent pending based on cattle hemoglobin. So we have this. Well, it boils down to you are what you eat. There is truth to that adage. We have eaten cattle for so long, for so many generations, that our blood is a virtual match to the blood of cattle. So when you talk blood and you talk death and you talk disfigurement, that sounds ritualistic to me. And I can always, I will always remind people to always bounce anything that you're thinking about off that relationship, Ryan, that you just brought up. And I think, we are what we eat. And that's got to have some sort of relevance here somewhere.
So,
certainly.
So I guess the most important question that everyone should be asking now is, when and where can they get your book?
Well, obviously you can get it on Amazon. It's actually doing pretty well. But if you want a signed, numbered copy, I'm signing a limited edition 1,000 copies of the first printing. The book's going to be going into a second printing pretty quick, and it's going to be a lot more expensive. I originally was signed to do a 350-page book for $19.95. This is $600, so the price is going to go up. If you want a signed, numbered copy, OurStrangePlanet.com. It is a strange planet we live on. It's OurStrangePlanet.com. And of course, every Sunday night we do a new broadcast of the Paracast. I've been the co-host going on 5 years. We're cutting edge radio show on the paranormal. All our archives, 400 shows plus, are there for free. So go to theparacast.com. My website, Our Strange Planet. Of course, I'm on Facebook, Christopher O'Brien. You can get in touch with me. I really welcome any Amazon reviews or thoughts or questions or whatever you. If I have time, I try to get back to everybody that contacts me. Like I said, one of my readers just said, "Hey, my family here on the Crow Indian Reservation in Pryor, Montana, just had 2 mutilations 3 days ago." So these cases are still going on, and someone's got to be out there helping ranchers and law enforcement. And I really appreciate you guys' efforts, and thanks for having me on the show.
Well, Chris, it was great to have you back on, and it was a very illuminating conversation. Of course, I want to thank you again for just giving us the book, because I do actually mean to read it again, and you gave it to us. I got it Tuesday, I think, and I did read through it, but there was so much detail that I'd like to go back and just like really let us sink in.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate reference book on this particular subject and a human's relationship with cattle.
It's such an important book, and just the way that, like, and that's the part that blew my mind, is that for every paragraph there were so many points and references that connected throughout the whole book, and that's what people need to realize going into it, is that it's not, there's no filler. It's 600 pages, but it's all like well documented, very thoroughly details, ranging right back from like the beginning, like thousands of years ago, right up to now. And so for a cattle mutilation, which is something that is so prominent in like UFO stories and stuff like that, this is like the go-to book. It explains so much of it, and again, like, it kind of has its own angle, but it's not from like your slant. There's no slant. It's just what the data tells you. So
and just so you know, I personally, I much prefer the unexplained animal death terminology rather than cattle
Thank
mutilation.
you, Ryan. I appreciate that.
So if we could get that meme going, because I think it's much more to the point of what we're
It's
talking
accurate.
about.
I mean, there have
Exactly.
been 30, 40 different species of animals that have been discovered mutilated, many of them routinely. And, an unexplained livestock death or an unexplained animal death, a UAD, as I tried to coin the term, almost 20 years ago, the word mutilation really turns people off. So, it's just an unexplained animal death, as far as I'm concerned.
well, it does sound
I
cleaner.
think that's a much more accurate way to describe it. And I really enjoyed how you took the time to point out to people, hey, the language you use is important, and it is so very much, and it's something that's lost on people. It's almost a pandemic situation where
Yeah, just go to your nearest hashtag tweeter comment.
OMG, what do you mean? BRB.
BRB.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you tonight.
Cool. Hey, anytime. It's almost like we did an introduction show, and we really need to get into the real stuff now.
Well, it's a really thorough book, but you know what? It's the best excuse I could tell people to go pick it up.
Yeah,
because it really is thorough. So again, Chris, thank you, and for everybody listening, if you have any paranormal stories or videos or pictures, submit that to us on effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com, and we'll put it on the site and possibly get it in a podcast. Thanks, everybody, and we'll catch you next time.
Have a good night, everyone.